I'm Willem and this is a 1989 Range Rover Classic, and today I'm going to review it. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the history of the car. I'm going to have a look at the exterior and the interior, and then I'm going to take it for a drive. If you have not done so yet, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. The more subscribers I get, the more cool cars I get, so please go ahead and do that if you get a chance. So when looking at the exterior of the car, one of the first things you'll see is this color. This color is actually called Cairngorm Brown, and I've never heard of that before. I actually had to go and Google what that actually means. But that's a mountain range in Scotland, for those of you who are interested in that. But having said that, this brown color I think is actually a very good looking color for this specific car. I don't really like the brown color on modern cars. There's a lot of them out there with the sort of metallic brown color like this. But this old classic Range Rover, I think it just suits the car extremely well. It looks really good in this brown color, and this sort of metallic pops out. And I think it really works well with the black wheels and sort of the black trimmings on the car and the black plastics and stuff. So I really like it. The second thing you'll notice about this car is obviously the general shape of the car. Like, it looks a little bit weird. I think when it came out at the time, they sort of used to station wagons and stuff. And this is sort of a big station wagon on stilts, sort of. But it looks really cool to me, and I think it aged really well going into the modern era now. It's that classic like boxy shape for an SUV or a 4x4, which you don't really see nowadays. Everything has gotten sort of rounded off. They are moving back to the boxy shapes again with some of the modern cars, but I think this boxy shape of the 1980s or early 90s is a really nice touch for this car. Cool, so when looking at the front of the car, like I said before, there's a lot of these black trimmings on this car, and it's got a lot of like these horizontal lines, and it's like a very boxy shaped car. But I think this grille looks very cool with these black like horizontal lines, and I think it suits the brown color well, like I said. You'll also see these small little round headlamps, which is something that you can't believe it's a modern Range Rover nowadays. They've got these crazy LEDs and laser lights and everything going on there. But I think this look with these classic halogen like round lights at the front, I really like it, and I think it adds to the touch. This one also has some of these spotlights installed, which was obviously, I'm not entirely sure if they were aftermarket or not. You could probably get them from Land Rover, but I suspect these have been added on aftermarket. And these square shaped fog lamps at the bottom there, which is also the sort of standard fog lamps that you saw in the 1980s and early 90s. Even some of the older Ferraris had these boxy shaped sort of rectangle fog lights, which I think just works well with the normal round headlamps. So continuing with the exterior of the car, next up we've got these wheels of the car, which I think looks really cool. It's probably one of the better looking things on this car. I love the fact that they're black, which adds complements obviously to the color. Like I said, the same with the front as well. But I really just like the way they look. It's so old school and like 1980s, early 90s. I just love them. And it makes it actually look like a proper off-roader. So moving to the back of this car, there's not a lot going on here like the modern Range Rovers nowadays. There's a couple of things. Obviously you see it says Range Rover at the back, which they still do in the modern ones. And it's got a small Land Rover badge here to show you that it is obviously a Land Rover. One of the main things you'll see are this sloping rear window, which is something that Range Rovers still do with the whole aesthetic of the car. It's one of the things that defines the shape of the car, and Range Rover is very much on the shape. It still looks very much the same. When you open up this massive window, you'll see it's on some shock, so it stays open, which is one of the cool features. You haven't seen that really before this car when it came out. And one of the other cool features, which is really one of the main things Range Rovers are known for, and they still do it today, is this little latch here at the back that you can fold open. And this was actually a seat, so you can actually sit on it if you sit on it, and you can have a coffee or a beer or whatever, some wine, shoot some animals or whatever you'd like to do in British Leyland. So yes, these were one of the main features of these cars, and Range Rovers still do them today. I think the modern one actually slides out, or it's like a completely different setup, but this is still something that they kept for, 30, 40, 50 years still going on. So yeah, it's pretty cool that it's on this car. Cool, so yeah, when you close this up, looking back at the exterior, you can see it's got a very nice approach and departure angle. So this is a massive, like one of the big benefits of Land Rover is obviously they're 4x4 vehicles. And this departure angle is very good for off-roading. So it sort of slopes up. So if there's any rocks or anything you'd need to hit at the back, this would have avoided that. Obviously, except if it was for this tow bar here at the back. But if that was removed, you have this very good departure angle, which you can see. And it also adds to the whole like shape and look of the car. So when opening up the engine bay of the Range Rover Classic, one of the first things that you will notice, well, the main thing you'll notice, of course, is this 3.9 litre V8 fuel injected engine. It actually looks really, really nice. It's a big, nice, chunky block engine. It says 3.9 on there, on the head. And it just really, really looks like a proper engine. If we drive it later, you'll also see that it gives some power and it's nice and smooth as well, which is, you know, for a almost 30-year-old car, this isn't too bad. One of the other things you'll see on this car is you'll see the actual color, Cairngorm Brown, here at the bottom. And it says Range Rover. It's got a few little original plaques on here. It also says Land Rover UK Limited, with the paint and the trim and the VIN number and everything. And yes, other than that, this is an old car, so a lot of the parts and things have gotten really old, but at least the engine still looks pretty cool. So the interior of the Range Rover Classic. I think before I get into this interior, one of the first things you'll notice are these seats, the material of the seats. I believe these are still the original ones. It's something that you will never see in a modern car nowadays. It sort of looks like your granddad's sofa chairs. These are the exact things you'd go and sit on if you have tea and coffee and cakes with your grandmother at their home. But they are actually really, really comfortable. When you get in them, they sort of feel like a proper sofa chair, and they're really comfy. We drove all the way here before we started the review, and one of the main things you notice is they're not really suited for the heat. Like, my back immediately started sweating because it's quite a hot day today, but they are really, really comfortable. I can imagine driving long journeys on these seats and not actually getting tired at all. You have these neat little sort of armrests here, which are one of the things that you still get in modern Range Rovers nowadays. And yeah, obviously one of the main things is this is supposed to be a luxurious off-road car. The Land Rover Defender, on the other hand, and some of the older Land Cruisers were very utilitarian when it came out. The seats were pretty much these sort of vinyl seats that you sat on with no armrest, nothing, and this actually feels very, very comfy. Yeah, so besides the seats, there's not a lot of storage space in here. There's no real cup holders that you see. You've only got this little sort of glove box compartment here, which goes quite deep, but it's nothing like the modern Range Rovers nowadays. But yes, there's a little ashtray here because I think everyone smoked back in the 80s, and especially in a car like this, how can you not want to smoke? And then there's a little like gap here where the radio area was. That's been taken out, unfortunately. You also have a little clock interface here at the front, which is supposed to be very modern back in the day. I don't think they had a lot of clocks in the utilitarian off-roaders back then. Also something adding like a sort of luxurious touch to this car, which this car tries to be, is this little wooden inlay here, which is pretty funny. It's just a small piece of wood that you're just stuck onto here, and that's to say, like, this is a luxurious vehicle, you have wood in your car, which is pretty funny to see. So that's a small touch. Nowadays, obviously, these cars have these fine woods that you can choose from, and it spreads all across the car. This just has a little sort of piece of wood or plank here, and yeah, it just adds to the whole touch and feel of it. So, setting off in the Range Rover Classic, the 1989 Range Rover Classic. Starting this drive on a piece of gravel road, seeing that this is an off-road car and it's supposed to be able to handle gravel roads and off-road conditions. Not like this is the worst type of off-road conditions this car should be able to handle. This is just a plain back gravel road. But the first thing you'll notice is this car is actually really soft riding. It's like a pretty soft, nice luxurious feeling car given its age. I mean, it's over 30 years old, but the suspension setup is pretty good, I have to say. Like, we've driven it obviously on roads as well, but this gravel road, it really sucks up all of the bumps and things you'll feel on the road. This was also the last era of Range Rover with conventional suspension setup. So after this, I mean, all of the new Range Rovers had air suspension that came sort of a standard, and this was on a standard coil spring setup, and I think it works pretty well. Like, I wouldn't complain at all driving this car on a gravel road, especially given its age, and I'm sure these like sofa seats also definitely helps with that. So secondly, you'll notice driving this car is the gearbox. It's got a ZF 4-speed automatic gearbox, which is, you know, ZF boxes are still being made today and they're still being used in a lot of BMWs and a lot of different variants of products. So, you know, that's actually a pretty good thing about this car, that you know that it's got a reliable ZF 4-speed gearbox. The gear ratios and the splits are pretty smooth. We've had some issues where I've put it into reverse and tried to start it where the car has just died on me a couple of times, but I think that's just the age of the car. I mean, usually in the 80s I've driven some old Porsches and stuff and it did exactly the same thing. We just transitioned on normal road surfaces, so let's see how it feels. This engine is quite punchy, like it's currently revving at around 2000 RPMs and we're doing around 80 kilometers per hour, which isn't really bad at all. There is some power and it's that 3.9 litre V8 engine. I have to say that's definitely one of the best features of this car. The power delivery feels smooth. It doesn't feel like laggy at all. Obviously it takes a while to like get on. I mean, if you put your foot down, you can hear that engine really working. It sounds a little bit like a tractor, but you can still hear it's a V8 and it's not the worst sound in the world, I have to say. Currently we are on a piece of road that's got some windy turns and stuff. I'm going to be honest, this is not where you'd like to take this car. The steering is pretty loose given it's a big off-road vehicle. It's set up for luxury, not going around corners as fast as possible like modern Range Rovers nowadays or modern SUVs. All of them are trying to be everything in one. They try to be a car that can go around corners, can go fast, can go off-road, can go on gravel. In this time of age, this was set up for pure luxury in 1989 when this car was made. So if there's a corner, I'm a little bit scared every now and then. I put my foot on the brakes and I just turn in a little bit because the steering is very, very loose. On gravel roads and stuff, that's perfect, but for roads like this, that's not ideal. So this 3.9 litre V8 engine produces 178 horsepower and around 300 Newton meters of torque, which is pretty good. I think it's almost 180 horsepower for 1989. Look, this is a very big car. It's not small. Even though the body is made completely of aluminium, it's a much thicker and heavier aluminium than we knew, or than we know nowadays. So even though it's made of aluminium, which was very revolutionary for back in the day, nowadays it's not that much. So it is still a very heavy vehicle, but the 180 horsepower isn't too bad, and 300 Newton meters of torque is pretty much enough for an old car like this. You'll very rarely want to drive this fast. I mean, this is something you'll cruise around mostly in the city, where I believe most of the owners of cars like this and Range Rovers and Land Rovers usually use their cars. You know, even though this car is a hardcore off-road car, one of the things that always pops up, obviously with Range Rovers, especially this era, is reliability. And we all know that these are not the most reliable cars in the world. That's just an honest fact. People can try and debate that, but I'm not sure a lot of people will. When you really want to go off-road, most people will buy something like a Land Cruiser, especially with some of the older models. You know they're robust and they're made for this. This car was more set up for luxury, which means electronics. And electronics are things that can break. Even though this car doesn't have a lot of electronics set up, it still definitely has a lot more things going on electronic-wise than an old Land Cruiser. So just take that into consideration if you're someone who wants to buy a car going off-road and stuff. This car currently retails for 295,000 Rand at Club9, which might seem a little bit expensive if you think about what you can buy for that money, and this being an old car and such. But I think the way that the market is leaning is that this car is moving towards the classic category. So if this car is going to be seen as a classic, obviously the value will spike. You don't see a lot of these on the road, and it is pretty rare nowadays. You've seen that with the Defenders especially. I mean, Defenders values have shot up extremely high in the past few years. I think for a 1989 Defender in South Africa, you'll probably pay almost twice that, close to twice that amount, it being already made a classic, and they don't make them anymore, especially, or the modern one isn't really a Defender, everyone knows that. So the older ones, definitely the value has spiked up. I know in the US it's even heavier than that. You can buy an old Defender probably for far north of R1 million. That's sort of the standard price nowadays, which is a crazy amount of money for them being so rare over there. And for this being 295,000 Rand now, it might seem like a lot, but in a couple of years it might go into the classic category and it might shoot up even more. For now, I'm going to drive this car back to the city. I think that is where this car belongs. And I just want to say thank you very much for watching. And I hope you enjoy the review.